Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daisy Gonzalez, and I'm an undergraduate public policy student and Dean's Ambassador for the School of Public Policy at UC Riverside. Welcome to today's special online event with our distinguished guest, City of Palm Desert Councilmember Jan Harnik. We will be discussing with her the topic of policy innovation after disasters. We had encouraged our attendees to read a very insightful article from The Atlantic magazine, but if you did not get a chance to read it, that's perfectly fine. You can still follow along in the discussion. My fellow ambassador, Jenny Chen, will be sharing the link to the article via the chat for those who may not have gotten a chance to read the article. Now, before bringing our special guest up, I will first go over the format for today's webinar. For the first part of today's online event, a panel of student discussants and I will be engaging with Councilmember Harnik in a roundtable discussion. Then we will open up some time for questions from the audience at the very end. Audience members, if you have any questions you would like to pose during the Q&A session, please do not send them via chat, but rather via the Q&A feature, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Audience members, you can submit your questions anytime throughout the event via the Q&A feature. You do not have to wait till the audience Q&A portion to do that. I will then pose audience questions to Councilmember Harnik once we reach the audience Q&A. So without further ado, I would like to now introduce our special guest. Councilmember Jan Harnik was elected to the Palm Desert City Council in 2010 and has twice served as mayor. She serves on the Coachella Valley Association of Governments Transportation Committee and on the Coachella Valley Conservation Commission. She is second vice president of the Southern California Association of Governments. She serves on the Riverside County Transportation Commission as first vice chair and on the commission's executive committee. Councilmember Harnik also serves on the executive board for the Coachella Valley Economic Partnership, the McCallum Theater's Board of Trustees, and in her personal time is co-president of the Girlfriend Factor, an organization dedicated to helping local disadvantaged women 25 years of age and up re-enter the workforce by providing grants for education. Councilmember Harnik is the recipient of numerous accolades. Just to name a few, she received a certificate of special congressional recognition for dedicated community service, a Distinguished Citizen of the Year Award from Sunrise District Boy Scouts of America, a Citizen of the Year Award from the Palm Desert Area Chamber of Commerce, and the highest Torch Program Award in recognition of service and continued education from the California League of Cities. We are very honored to have her here with us today. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us, Councilmember Harnik.
Well, thank you. It's exciting to be here. I wish we could all be together. I know we all say that all the time now. So the first thing I'll tell you about is, if I may, is really how I got into public service. And I first was elected in December of 2010. And I will tell you that a year before that, had someone told me I would be on city council, I would have thought they were crazy, because I was not leaning in that direction. And I'll tell you how it came about. I was with some buddies of mine from high school, and we would get together every once in a while, and we were in Tujunga having dinner. And I said to one of them, I started saying that I felt that there was some abuse of public funds going on in our city. And he said, well, what are you doing about it? And, well, I'm telling you. He said, well, if you're not going to do anything about it, well, I'll just say this. He said, be quiet, but that's not exactly how he said it. And he said, if you really want to do something about it, run for city council. So I thought about it. And then about a month or two later, I was at an event, and I've always raised money for education. And at this time, it was for the Palm Desert High School Foundation. And at the end of the event, somebody came over to me and they said, you know, maybe you should think about running for city council. So then it happened twice in such a short period of time. My youngest daughter was then a senior in high school. And I thought, you know, this is an interesting thought. My husband and I went home, we talked about it. And I thought, you know, I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to work harder than anybody else. Because I was not known. I did my, raised my children. I always worked, but I was really so involved with the high school foundation at the time and not much beyond that. So I just knew I was going to have to work really hard. So I was elected. I unseated an incumbent, which hasn't happened. It was the second time it's happened in Palm Desert history. And I was interested. I wanted to be involved in parks and recreation and art and public places and marketing. And at the first meeting, when the mayor appoints people their committee and commissions assignments, I was given Riverside County Transportation Commission. And that was not anything I was interested in. So I put a smile on my face and I went to the meetings, and I love it. And I found something that I had not been exposed to before. And I found out how much I love transportation and land use and how much it impacts all of us every moment that we're in our communities, any place we go, anything we do. And I really enjoyed it. And then RCTC, Riverside County Transportation Commission. And if I get involved in saying acronyms, please stop me. And because, you know, we all live in different worlds of acronyms. They appointed me to Southern California Association of Governments. So that's how I got involved there. And it's just been interesting every step of the way.
Thank you, Councilmember, for sharing your experience, right, in local government and how you kind of got started there.
And let me share really quickly. I want to just one other thing I didn't think about. In my life as a voter, and I was one of the first generations or first 18-year-olds allowed to vote when that was switched, and that was because of the Vietnam War. We went from 21-year-olds being able to vote to 18-year-olds. So in this time, I have been everything from, I have been a Democrat, I have been a Republican, and today I am an NPP. I am a no party preference. And I feel I can do my best work that way. Additionally, according to our California state constitution, city and county elected positions are mandated as nonpartisan. And I believe we can do our best work when we're looking at what are the people needs, what are the community needs, not what are the party needs. So just a little reference point for the conversation.
Definitely, right? We need to, you know, come together to see what's best for our community members, essentially our cities. So thank you so much for sharing that experience. I'd also like to introduce some of my fellow classmates who will be joining our student discussion panel. We have Maddie Bunting, Jenny Chen, Arlette Flores Aparicio, and Andrea Rayas. So thank you all for being here and for participating in this discussion with me. I'd like to now hand it off to Maddie for her question. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into the Atlantic article. You know, it was a very terrific read. So we'd like to, you know, move forward and discuss with the article. So Maddie?
Yes, thank you so much, Councilmember Harnik, for joining us. And I loved hearing about how you got started, how you got interested, and in taking that power into your own hands. I really admire that. That's a wonderful quality. But adding on to what Daisy just said, yes, I would love to talk about the Atlantic article written by Derek Thompson, just for the benefit of those who may have read it a while back or don't remember, or those who may not have had the time to read it. The article points to various disasters throughout history and how inevitably innovative policies soon followed in response to those crises. So for example, you know, in 1842, it took a disaster with an aqueduct to bring about clean drinking water for residents of New York. In 1888, the worst blizzard in US history, which ravaged the city's above-ground railway system, brought about the country's most famous subway system, of course, in New York. And these are just a few instances where disasters have forced policymakers to rethink their approach to how to do things. So Councilmember Harnik, as a local government official, could you tell us why you think this article is important for people, especially aspiring young policy leaders like us, to read?
Well, there was so much information in that article. And you saw that what I see from it when I read it, and the first time I read it, all I could think was I need to read it again because it was so informative. And when we look at, let's take the 1888 blizzard in New York City. And rather than, and they even say in the article, they didn't stockpile snow shovels to handle the next blizzard. They looked at really important results and how it impacted the city. So it causes us to look, I believe, when we look at these things in a very broad and inclusive lens. And in that, let's talk about the fact that they talked about all their telephone and their telegraph wires were all brought down. And here's an amazing thing in my mind, and having been in government for a while now, they said the government gave all of those providers, all those people providing the utilities, 90 days to underground them. 90 days. It would take years in today's environment for that to happen. But in 90 days, they got that underground and they learned from it. And also when we look at the subway system, that only took about, I think it was about 14 years. And Manhattan's on bedrock. I mean, they got a subway system in 14 years. Can you imagine? I mean, think of the Los Angeles subway system and how long that's taking. They got things done. But at the same time, when we talk about them undergrounding the utilities and how important it was, and they recognized that they had to underground it because of weather conditions, that was in 1888. So in 1850, when California became a state, so now we're growing and we're putting in telegraph wires and telephone wires, the electricity and all those types of utilities. Where are we putting them? Above ground. What is one of the biggest problems we have that's causing wildfires right now? Utility wires above ground. So it's so important that we look at these in as broad of a lens as we can, and we learn from these experiences. And it was unfortunate, we didn't really learn in California to underground those wires. And they learned that in Manhattan. And yes, would it be more expensive to underground them initially? Yes. But when you think of the human lives that have been lost because of fires and all of the costs that are associated with fighting wildfires, it wouldn't be that expensive. So it's so important to look at those things. So we look at the entirety and how, always think of that, the pebble in the pond and the ripple effect. And when you view things through, if you look at one problem and look through a very narrow lens to find a solution for one small problem, you're not looking at all the other problems you may be creating. So it's so important to look in the big picture. And I think they talk a lot about that in the article, where you kind of have that perspective.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you,
and let me mention this, as we're talking about that article, another thing, and probably you've all heard about it, maybe some of you have watched it, because this is something we're going to hear a lot about with public policy. Please go watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix. It's so worth it, and we're all going to be confronted with these issues, and we're all going to be working hard to find the solutions that we need.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Arlette.
Thank you for introducing us to that very insightful lead, council member, especially talking about you were getting into my question, actually. So the article talks about the impact disasters have on cities. For those of us who may not know, could you speak about what happens behind the scenes in local government when there is a disaster? And could you talk about the importance of disaster planning at the local level?
Well, so I'm in Palm Desert, which is in the Coachella Valley, and we're right on a fault line. So we always talk about when we have, or if we have an earthquake, and really the question is when. And it used to be that we were always told, well, you need to have 3 days supply of food and water. Well, now we say it's 2 weeks. And if there is a bad enough earthquake that it cuts off our transportation, our water, electricity, all the infrastructure we need on a day-to-day basis, you can be sure that emergency responders, we won't be the focus. Los Angeles, Riverside, Orange County, will be the focus. So it's so important, and we recognize that. So at the City of Palm Desert, there are a lot of ways that we prepare. It's planning, it's preparation. It really is just practicing these things. We have an emergency operations center, our EOC, that's at City Hall. We know when there's a disaster, drop what you're doing and do your best to get there so that we can start taking care of the community's needs. We have CERT training, and CERT is Community Emergency Response Team. And these are classes that we provide for our community. Now, they're free classes, and they sell out. Can you sell out a free class? And they are filled up immediately. And we teach first aid response. They're taught to go check on your neighbor. Go turn off your gas. All these things that we need to know. And I'm just going to mention something because I said they're free classes. When in government people say it's free, remember, the government comprises the people. And it's those free things are funded by the people's taxpayer dollars. That's you and me. So we have a real obligation to make sure that those dollars are spent well. And a CERT class is certainly one of those things. And we're paying for it. We are taxpayers, and we pay for those things. There are no free anythings. There's always cost associated. And it's important to identify where those costs are too, so that you understand what the cost of a free thing is. But that's a true investment back into the community. When you have people understanding how to respond in an emergency, how to help a neighbor, how to maybe save a life, get somebody out of a building, and really when we rely on each other in an emergency, and we really need to be able to do that. The other thing we have to look at, another good example, is we used to have floods in Palm Desert. And we'd get those storms, and everyone loves to tell the story about in the 70s when they saw a refrigerator coming down the street in floodwaters. I mean, it's one of those famous stories, and there's pictures, so there is truth to it. But we put in some great flood control, and we used to have what they called redevelopment funds. So we put in flood control systems, so we no longer have that problem. So the best we can do is try and prevent. And there's certain things you can prevent, because prevention is much, much less expensive than repairing. And so we look at those things as much as we can. The other thing that's important for us to do behind the scenes before an emergency, and the council works on it, and so does our staff. And we all work together as a team on this. And we have to do some media prep, because we have to be able to speak honestly so that people know what to expect, so that they know what they have to do now. We don't want to create hysteria. We don't want to frighten people, but we have to manage expectations and have them understand really what it is we're dealing with, and show empathy. We're there for them, but we're all in this together. So being able to speak to people and communicate and give the appropriate message is really critical in an emergency. So we deal with that. We also we go through in risk assessment. We have something called the JPIA, Joint Powers Insurance Authority, that we belong to, and they'll help us in our city doing risk assessment so that we can avoid the problems and remedy issues that may be occurring. So there's a lot to it. And of course, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, but the most important thing we can give to our community members is the education of what they need to do. And with education, you can solve just about whatever ails our community. We can find a little bit of a solution there at least. So if we can educate our community members, it really is very helpful. So we work very hard at that. Again, with the CERT training and those sorts of things, they're very helpful. We send out a newsletter that says, here's what you need to stockpile. We do as much as we can on that.
Thank you, Councilmember. Up next, we have a question from Jenny.
Councilmember, it sounds so great to hear what the City of Palm Desert is doing to help their citizens prepare for disasters like earthquakes, since the city is along the fault line. That leads me to my next question. The author, Derek Thompson, poses some rhetorical questions in the article. He says calamity forces people to ask fundamental questions. What is a community for? How is it put together? What are its basic needs? How should we provide them? Councilmember, I was just curious how you yourself might answer these particular questions he poses. What is a community for? How is it put together? What are its basic needs and how should we provide them?
Well, that's like a conversation we could have that could be, we could build a 3-day conference on, because it's so important. And for us to take a look back at how is a community formed? And if you look back in history, and I mean ancient history, where it was hunters and gatherers, it was every person for themselves. And then I think with understanding and evolution, we understood that it was better if we helped each other and we built on what other people have built and their experiences. And certainly a naturally evolving community, something that takes on the natural order of evolution rather than something that's artificially contrived and then imposed on a group of people. The natural evolution, it feels comfortable. We're good with it. We can grow with it. And this is one more of those things that I go back to education. That's what we need to give our community. Whatever ails us, we solve with education, whether it's ignorance, whether it's a lack of jobs, it's health, it's quality of life, it's joy. With education, all of those things are attainable, but we always have, the most important thing I think we can give any community is accessible, relevant, high quality education. That solves so many problems. And part of answering the what's community question, think of where we'd be today without community. And when I say today, going through 2020, and we've been through plenty. I mean, this will be, you'll all be looking back in your later years going, remember in 2020 when? I mean, it will be a really learning moment for all of us. And we have an opportunity to come out of this, I think, so much better. And part of it, why I say that is because a naturally occurring community can adjust and accommodate the changes. And we can do that. And then when you factor in education and what it provides to us all, we can come out of this better. And, I challenge you all to take a look and find those opportunities that COVID actually has provided us. Hopefully there'll be a time when we're having the conversation, we're not saying due to COVID and then fill in the blank here, which is all negative. There's some positive things that we are going to bring out of here. And there's some opportunities we've already identified. There's a lot more that we can identify. So with community, when we work together, and imagine you must have such great conversations in your classes and, in your cohorts when you're building on things together. And that is your community at that moment. So, I think we could have a conference on what is community and what do we need to bring to community.
Definitely, Councilmember. I agree. We need to rely on each other. We need to rely on our community.
We're social animals.
Yeah, and we can't do this alone, right? We need our community for support and for those trusting relationships. So thank you for your insight on that. Our next question is from Andrea.
Hi, Councilmember. You're kind of going into my question, actually, saying how with COVID, some positives can actually come out from it. So in that Atlantic article, we learned that British cities suffered from multiple waves of disease, forcing officials to explore the relationship between city design and city proliferation. The article explains that diseases arose from urban environment failures. This disaster led to Public Health Act of 1848 and the Nuisances Removal and Disease Prevention Act, which were new ways of thinking about diseases. New medical advances such as contact tracing, testing, and vaccinations have aided society in determining airborne versus water diseases. The COVID-19 pandemic brought about a crisis that we were all unprepared for. How do you think the current COVID-19 crisis has led to more policy innovation or new ways of thinking when it comes to public health?
And there's, I think, so many ways we could all identify right now. And in a year, imagine what we'll take a look at. So let's look quick even at just the societal norms. We shake hands automatically. That's an automatic thing. If somebody comes up to you and puts their hand out, you won't even think you'll put your hand out. Well, we may start thinking now. So there may be some of those types of things that we're so used to. And in the Japanese culture, they do a very respectful small bow. Maybe that's what we'll be doing, but we will definitely change things the way we've done it. And a lot of, we're so caught unprepared. And why are we caught so unprepared? Because over the last couple decades, we've watched pandemics in Asia. We've seen them in Africa. And yet, why in America? Why do we have this thing where we weren't prepared? Why did we not think about it? And this is not a political question at all. There seems to be something in the American psyche. And I watched somebody who was from Amsterdam, and he was part of the engineering group that put together all these dikes and dams, and because they're below sea level. And he said, we're prepared. And as sea level's rising, of course, it's more important. He said, but we don't know why in America you don't do that. We've done it. And so we've watched Louisiana and New Orleans go through their problems. So what is it about the American psyche? And I'm talking now completely overgeneralizing, but it's still a pretty safe statement. Why don't we prepare in advance? So it's something to think about. But how will we react? If you look back, and I had read an article a while ago about in the 30s and 40s, how tuberculosis impacted the way we design. Things were very closed and dark, and there were heavy fabrics. And then in the 30s and 40s, because tuberculosis was so difficult, you started seeing the wide open windows and light and the clean lines and that modern type of architecture and design where it was much cleaner, much less cluttered. And that was a result of tuberculosis. So think about right now, because of the environmental crisis, we started kind of hermetically sealing all our buildings because we wanted to keep the cold air where we wanted it and the hot air where we wanted it. Well, now we're going to have to look at how do we keep the airflow working better? So there's a lot of those sorts of things. And keep in mind also that what we see in play now was in play before COVID, but it's accelerated the process. It magnified it, and it also put it on the fast track. A year ago, the conversation about the digital divide and Wi-Fi connecting the region was kind of subtext. It was a quiet part of the conversation. Now it's the conversation. So it was there before, but it just accelerated the process. So it's something that's a good thing, because now we're going to make sure that people who need education or people who need to be connected will have the bandwidth and the Wi-Fi and the fiber we need to be connected. And that will be one of those things that'll be innovation we will see come out of COVID that will accelerate that process. So we need to identify those sorts of things also with traffic and transportation. It took cars off the road. Well, and out of necessity, we were mandated to stay home. Well, now what we've found is that we don't have to go to the office 5 days a week. There are many jobs that can go 3 days a week. Well, now you've taken 2/5 of the cars off the road if you do that. And that has, of course, such a positive impact on what we're breathing. And of course, you're not sitting behind the wheel 2 days a week, perhaps. whatever your job allows. So there's a lot that we can see that's going to come out of this. And even how we clean will be different. So I think again, we've recognized the importance of education. And so the Wi-Fi will come of this and we'll be more connected. Just try and think what would have happened had we been hit with all of this 20 or 30 years ago. We wouldn't be able to have these meetings. I mean, we kind of went on pretty well. I mean, Zoom became a thing. But if this had happened 20 or 30 years ago, where we didn't have those little computers we hold in our hands, we didn't have access, it really would have shut down the country. So it's amazing. And we'll see how this, I would love to have this conversation with you in a year. I think it'll be so interesting what we come out of it. So again, our job, identify opportunity. What can we do better?
Thank you, Councilmember. Definitely, we're gonna, learn from this experience, I think, and we think the way we, go about things in our day-to-day lives. So
and think about this additionally, the trash we are now creating that we didn't before. We were kind of making headway with getting rid of plastic bags and slowing down on the use of plastic bottles. But now when you do takeout, it is wrapped, rewrapped, and wrapped again. And we have now increased, and I'll bet in about 6 months or so, there'll be statistics and there'll be some answers from those people who are waste collectors and managers, how much it increased and what impact that's had. So hopefully we'll learn from that too, about what we don't need as far as, whether it's the straws or whatever it is. We're going to learn from this.
Thank you, Councilmember. I would like to take this moment in the middle of our student panel discussion to remind the audience to please go ahead and type in any questions that you may have via the Q&A feature below. I will pose your questions to Councilmember Harnik once we reach the audience Q&A portion. I actually have the next question for you, Councilmember. The article covers how the Chicago fire led to the invention of skyscrapers in response to that crisis. California recently has experienced an increase in wildfires in recent years. This year alone, several California cities were hard hit, like Yucaipa, Napa, and Oroville. Are there ways cities could innovate in the fight against these wildfires that are becoming more common year in and year out?
There's a lot we can do. And this again is one of those things where we looked at a problem through a narrow focus. And and when I was a kid, Smokey was all that. I mean, Smokey the Bear was it. And we just wanted to do whatever Smokey told us to. And there was a huge public campaign about, you too can prevent forest fires. The fact is, forest fires are actually naturally occurring. And have they increased? Yes, because we have our overground utility wires. One of the reasons. Climate change has an impact too. And that's unfortunate. When I was growing up in the San Fernando Valley, we had the Santa Anas. Now it's all over California, and those are hot, dry winds, and they do create havoc. Especially when we're having the fires, they're awful. But a return to our natural ecosystem is important. To have invasive types of plants creates fuel for wildfires. Not to clear out underbrush creates fuel for those wildfires. Plus, it increases the heat and the intensity and makes them worse. So, a sequoia, which is to me one of the most magnificent things on this earth, they can't survive. They won't keep growing without fire. They must have fire for a sequoia to keep going. But those were naturally occurring fires over the 3,000 years of a lifespan of a sequoia, when lightning hit and it burnt out things. But the sequoia needed that so that it could have the seedlings come up. That had to happen. So we have to look at undergrounding. We have to make sure when we're planting things that we are not planting invasive species of plants that will take over our natural ecosystem and again create fuel for those fires. And this is a place government has to step in. And I am not a big proponent of huge government, but this is a place government is going to have to step in and clean out that undergrowth. We have to clean that out. We can't step back and say, well, it's naturally occurring. We stopped some fires that would have burnt that out, and some of it has to be done. But we know we have to improve our infrastructure, and that's undergrounding, because the tragedy of the loss of life, the expense and the tragedy is unacceptable. So we really have to look at how does government get in there and really help clear out those problem spots that fuel these terrible, terrible fires.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Maddie.
Yes, thank you. So speaking of extreme weather conditions, these conditions have led to a call for greener cities. Could you speak about what cities might do on a local level to be more environmentally friendly and curb pollution through green energy?
Well, I have to answer with educate. Number one, most important thing is people understand the issues that are created when we don't. And of course, solar is out there, and that's a good answer. And there are lots of other type of green energy solutions that we have to look at and we have to make the most of as we go forward. There's also, when you look at this, and Palm Desert was at the forefront of a lot of innovation as far as green energy and those sorts of things. But we have to look at our architecture. Is it complementary to the natural surroundings? And if you look at some of the older buildings in the desert, you'll see they have large overhangs. And those were to protect from the sun. Now you get these little bitty overhangs, maybe they're 18 inches, 12 inches. Well, there's things that we need to do where we need to build to complement the environment we're in. And when you look at the breeze blocks that you see, the mid-century modern breeze blocks, they're called, and they're pattern bricks is what they are. But those were to allow air to go through and some, but to protect you from them. So our architecture is really important to look at that. And the other thing we do with in the community, we put great value on our committees and commissions. And these are our community members who come together, they volunteer. And we have a sustainability committee. And they really worked hard on the plastic bag issue. They did great work on the plastic bag. We were ahead of the state mandate, and they did wonderful work. So working with your committees and commissions to do things like that, because not only did they come up with a great idea of something to work on, they're your voice in the community, and they can speak to the entire community and get people on board why it's so important to take these initiatives, whether it's the better windows using solar, the high, efficient appliances that we can get. They can go out and they can speak to that issue. And we've done a lot of good. And having the right windows, you don't want to build a home with all your windows facing the most brutal sunlight of the day. And yet we still do that sometimes. So having architects who are environmentally sensitive and understand that complementing our environment, our natural environment, is the most important thing they can do, is part of that issue. So sometimes you've got to put those codes in your building codes so that people pay attention to it. And that's even with what plants you're going to grow. Because going back to the invasive species, where would you want to put a shade tree? Where will that be the most beneficial to how your house is built and how it's situated.
Thank you, Council Member. Our next question comes from Jenny.
The points you made about how to be more environmental friendly at a local level was really interesting to me. So my next question is, homelessness is a crisis on the national as well as local levels. The current economic uncertainty may potentially lead to a rise in homelessness. Might you have recommendations for how cities could tackle this issue?
Well, let's start that when we hear people talk about homelessness, we'll hear this. They have a drug problem. They have a mental health problem. It is a myriad of issues that cause this problem. It's all of us who are one step away from perhaps our employment downsizing and us losing our job, and then maybe a medical emergency, and we're homeless. It can happen to anybody. So we can't go at homelessness with a one-size-fits-all. And so many things that we try to address, we can't do that. We have to look at this as a multifaceted issue. It's taken us a long time to get here, so it's not going to be changed overnight. But certainly, I think that the hearts and minds of most community members want to work on this. So that's the good news. A lot of times, some of the state mandates make it more difficult to build that housing, and that's unfortunate. I can tell you that I believe that the police, and I don't believe it is the police's job, police men and women, it's not their job to deal with homelessness. However, they need to be trained to be able to when the time occurs. And I've gone on ride-alongs with our police. We contract with the Riverside County Sheriff, and I have watched them deal so beautifully with a homeless situation. And I was so impressed when I saw that. But that's not their main job. Nonetheless, they must be prepared to deal with it when they encounter the situation. In the city of Palm Desert, what we've done is we have allocated funds from our budget to hire 2 social workers who are on the streets and can find out what a specific person, again, not every homeless person is the same person. And it is really unfair to ever think that, and it doesn't help us get a solution by thinking that. So it's our social workers' job to find out what the issue is, how we can help them, and how we can address this. So we have a lot of issues that we need to deal with. And, you know, when you talk about on a local level like this, we are so accountable, because I go to the grocery store and I could be stopped in the produce section to talk about homelessness. So we are very accountable. And I think sometimes when the higher up people get sometimes and they leave the area, they might sometimes forget how their policy impacts when it hits the ground, when the rubber hits the road. How does it impact? And we know that. And so we're trying our hardest to, again, the social workers, to get housing built. But when we have so many unfunded mandates and so many ordinances that come down from Sacramento, where then we're trying to build a 1-bedroom place for somebody, and it costs $500,000 because of all these regulations. And I have to say those regulations were put in place to solve a problem, but we didn't look at the ripple in the pond. And so it created issues as well. And those are difficult problems, but we have to get the housing built. We can't have it cost so much that it's prohibitive. And as Americans, it should never be okay with us that we know our neighbor, a community member, is sleeping outside on the streets because they have no other choice.
Definitely, Council Member. And as Jenny had stated, this is both a national and a local crisis that we really need to be looking at and seeing our potential intended or unintended consequences when passing policies addressing this issue. But it's so great to hear, right, what the city of Palm Desert is doing to address this issue. Our next question actually comes from Arlette.
It was very insightful to hear what Palm Desert, how Daisy was saying about homelessness. And my question is kind of going to connect that as well when it comes to a steady increase in the population growth in California. So here in the Inland Empire, the population continues to grow at a rapid pace. Many would say this is a global crisis. How can cities prepare to manage this population growth?
So I'm gonna say something. You're gonna say, yeah, like I don't have enough reading to do. There's a book called Factfulness. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's by Hans Rosling. And it is something I recommend everybody read because it's the title of it, it's Factfulness, and it's 10 reasons why we're wrong about how bad the world is, or it's something like that. And it is so worth reading. And it's a little bit dry, but there are some moments there that you're going to go, I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. And our population growth actually is not on the trajectory that it was at one time, as far as births. It has significantly leveled off. Now, to your point, Arlette, Riverside County is the fastest growing county in California and one of the fastest growing in our country. So we do have to look at this, and I'm going to go back to education because, again, it's what cures all that ails us. And I want to be very careful here because I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone's religious beliefs or cultural beliefs. But here's a place where we have to, if we're just talking about birth rate, we have to talk about contraception. And this is one of those places, and I know I'll get some raised eyebrows over this. This is where government needs to step in, and anybody over 18 who has the information, the education, and wants contraception, government should give it to them. That should not be in the way. That is one place I support government stepping in all across the board. Absolutely, because it's one of those things that can help us. And we can all talk about all the ways contraception can be okay. We have the technology. We know ways that it can be safe for everyone. And this is a place government should step in, I believe. I would have, and I'm again, I had said earlier, I am not in favor of the big government, but this is a place government belongs. And to educate everyone about the issue with increased population is critical. And one of the things I always will say is one of the things I believe America did best was provide public education, because that's, we get a gold star for doing that. Could we do better? Yes, we can do better. But we need to educate as we go along with looking at that. But I do encourage you, please read the book Factfulness, because it's full of a lot of, as I said, dry reading, but there's some great graphs. So good. We got pictures that show us and tell us the story really well. And you'll see that a lot of the things we hear when you take the numbers and you apply them in a very factual way, it's a little different than sometimes what the narrative brings out. So I think it's one of those really great reads.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have a next question from Andrea.
Thank you, Daisy. So, Councilmember, I did want to let you know that one of our attendees actually thanks you for providing this thoughtful discussion. And they also did mention that inequality has arisen due to the pandemic. And you have been mentioning education and putting it in the forefront. So my next question does dive into education and inequality issues. So as a past president of Palm Desert High School Foundation, you helped spearhead multi-year efforts to raise funds and distribute resources to improve student academic performance. Given that we are now witnessing a crisis of disparities in schools and lack of resources, how could cities aspiring for innovation potentially continue to make education accessible for disadvantaged students?
Okay, so I am going to say that the disparities are now apparent to us because it's one more thing that COVID has magnified. It's always been there. Now, having said that, I'm going to go back to say, look how much we've done. Don't ever lose sight of what we have done because it proves we can do it. We have more work to do. There's nobody here that's going to say, no, it's perfect. We have a lot of work to do. But don't forget, we've done a lot with education. And we have provided public education for everyone. Are there disparities? Boy, aren't there. So I see it in the valley where I live. We see it. We see the test scores, the standardized test scores vary wildly, and they shouldn't. And we need to take a look at that. And when I worked for Palm Desert with the high school foundation, and this was a volunteer position, the perception is, well, Palm Desert doesn't have, an economy that might ever have an issue. The fact is they do. We had kids at the high school who lived in cars. Right down the street from where I'm standing right now, we have an elementary school where 95% of the kids are on free or fee-reduced lunches. So we have to all work on that. And I can tell you the city has taken a very strong stance on the role of education. And we take the kind of the philosophical approach that our schools are not apart from our city, but they are a part of our city. And if we're going to be great, it's because we're going to have great schools. And we will have the product of great schools are people like you. And we have to make sure that we continue supporting them. And one of the things we do is, besides the money that is mandated as pass-through funds from our taxes and revenue sources, we put money aside as a city to make sure that we provide after-school programs for our students. We provide enhancement programs, academic enhancement programs. So we make sure we do that. Another thing that the city is doing right now, we are working in conjunction with our local CSU. We have a branch, a satellite campus here, and the Coachella Valley Economic Partnership and the city have come together to create an iHub where we're bringing over the appropriate bandwidth that you would need for technology and computer sciences. And we're starting it's a cybersecurity program. And we're helping people who want to be involved in that. Because again, I'm going to go back to relevant education. And that's a relevant education is something in cybersecurity. So we're focusing on those sorts of things as a city. And I want to remind everybody when we talk about the community or government that, of course, that's us. But so much of this begins with an individual. And what we do as an individual is critical. And we have to remember that whether it's what we buy or how we participate or where we choose to help fundraise or volunteer, as individuals, we can make a difference. And that's where it starts. That's where we can get things done.
Yes, it's our responsibility, but I think also, centering schools within communities. Essentially, that's where, we get resources and we get support because, again, we can't do this alone. We have to reach out to our communities to help us out. But thank you again, Councilmember Harnik, for answering our student panel questions. At this time, we will now open it up for questions from our audience. Our first question comes from Mike McGreevy, and they ask, do you feel that home and condo earthquake insurance coverage be mandated?
Well, as somebody who has earthquake insurance, I think it's important that we have that because there will be, I think we've all experienced earthquakes. Anybody who's lived in California has lived through an earthquake or two or more. And if you don't have insurance, who then will take care of the damage that you may experience in an earthquake? Is it fair for you not to carry that insurance and then expect, again, the government, which is us, to pay for your damage? It's a tough question, and I will be the first to tell you I am not a professional at insurance, and I would reach out before if I ever had to vote on something like that, I would do my studying and I would reach out to people who could give me better answers, and which is what I do whenever I vote on a vast array of issues, and I always do my research. I have people I can reach out and ask questions of, and that would be something I would ask other people. But quickly and in a nutshell, if somebody has, we have to have personal responsibility. We see this in COVID. We have to have personal responsibility. I think you must take care of your home too, because as compassionate people, and I believe most Americans are, if somebody's house goes down, we're going to want to take care of them. So is it fair to put the onus on somebody else rather than having that insurance that hopefully will be able to take care of those problems?
Thank you, Councilmember. We have another question from our attendee. They ask, at a local level, how can we make eco-friendly actions to be more accessible and affordable?
Well, who bought plastic water bottles recently? Don't buy them. These are tough questions, but again, this is, as an individual, what can you do? We can make small actions, we can make small changes, and when we all do it together, it changes what it looks like. Do you bring a reusable bag to the grocery store? Do you use a reusable bottle and fill it up yourself? So there's sorts of things we need to do. And when those are they seem small things, but we as consumers, we have the power to make big changes. And those are those sorts of things. And so, it's, you vote with your dollar. When you go into a store, you do. So even, and I'm so fortunate, my kids don't mind telling me ways I could do better. Any chance they get, they tell me, and they actually have some very good advice. So I can remember one of my daughters telling me, and this is a long time ago, "Mom, bring your own bag to the grocery store." And this is well more than a decade ago. So those sorts of small things we can do. How can we, if you're talking about how can we make solar cheaper, it will be less and less expensive with time because it will be market driven, but it's still an expensive thing. So it's one of those, when you look at the long run, again, it's the ripple. So when I buy my solar, if I can look at it in 10 years, will it have paid for itself? And there are programs out now where you can get a reasonable loan to put solar on your roof. But there's a lot we need to do. And part of it is we need to have our voices heard. So we need to speak up when you believe in something. And it's not just, it's what can you do about it too. And I'm going to touch on something really quickly, because one of the things I believe in so strongly and that I do outside of my work, and this is on my personal time, is you mentioned about Girlfriend Factor. And we're just a group of, it's a local organization, and we do one thing. We raise money for women who are 25 years of age or better, and we give them grants to put them back into school. So that's what I do. And an educated woman, our tagline is, if you want to change the world, educate a woman. So, what are we all doing? What are we as individuals doing? So we really have to have our voices heard. We have to not only talk about it, but we have to take the actions.
Yes. Going back to your response, it is the little things, right, that are going to help us, do eco-friendly decisions and go forward that eco-friendly world that we want to get into. So it is definitely the small things when I go to the store as well. I always try to bring my, reusable bags,
I
or
love that.
yeah, and even sometimes I'll go to Starbucks and I'll bring my reusable cup, right? And so it's the little things that we can do as individuals to help. You mentioned, your organization that you're part of, Girlfriend Factor. I actually wanted to ask a question. Reports state that 1 in 4 women are currently considering leaving the workforce. And again, you are co-president of the Girlfriend Factor. Do you view this consequence of our current recession as alarming or a crisis?
Daisy, I would love to know more about why are those 1 in 4 women thinking about leaving the workforce? That would be a really important piece of information. And the need that we recognized as far as how Girlfriend Factor came around was we saw so many women who were in such a bad situation. And it was certainly before COVID. We've been around now, I think 14 years. We've helped, I'm going to say 177 women. I think that's our latest number. I hope I'm not too far off. But this is a situation where when somebody doesn't have a great education to begin with, they're going to make not the best decisions. So we've helped women. We had one woman who thought, well, I know a great life. I'm going to be a truck driver. And she was a truck driver for a while and then said, yeah, maybe this isn't the life I thought it would be. And now today she's a nurse. We've had the women who made just bad choices with drugs, whatever it might be. We've had the women who were into their life, things seemed to be going well, and maybe the spouse died and here they are with kids. So what the issues are across the board, and we address them all. If they show us need, and kind of our criteria is that they have the drive that says with or without Girlfriend Factor, they're going to make it. But we're there to make it easier for them. So the women we help, they're local women. They're from the Coachella Valley, and they come from just all different points of our community. And they all have gotten here whichever way, but they've gotten to the point where they want to be sustainable, self-sustainable. They want to be good role models for their children and for the community, and they want to teach their children, this is what you do. And it's a tremendous feeling when you watch one of those women walk across the stage at their graduation. So that's, those are those sorts of things. I think we're going to see, of course, more people realize after COVID, what is an essential job? So we may have greater need. We may have a much larger pool of grant applications than we've had in the past because essential work is different, and it will change. And especially where we live, which has in the past been so tourist oriented. And, one of the first things we heard when this happened is tourism is not essential. And it hurt a lot of people. So hopefully we'll see a lot of these women wanting to go and get their education, whether it's in some allied health area or we have it's so wonderful seeing all the things that they're studying too and graduating and being successful. We love it. And when they come back to help Girlfriend Factor and to volunteer, that's probably the best feeling.
Yes, it's very rewarding to hear, the accomplishments of what these women are doing and so forth. Very rewarding to hear that. We actually have our next question from one of our student discussants. Arlette, do you want to ask your question?
So my question is, what is the next big step towards helping the community for Palm Desert? Like when the next big disaster happens, I guess it could be public health or it could be the next earthquake, but has Palm Desert kind of, created a task force or written resolutions or legislation?
Well, that's really, and I am going to write down, because that to me, and I am writing, that would be a great committee to talk about this, because we did learn a lot in this, and we learned where we were prepared and we felt good about that, but where we also have identified some of the places we could have done better. We've done well for our businesses. The first thing we did was we have something, and I thought it was quite brilliant, and our staff came up with this. It's Unite Palm Desert. So it's kind of an umbrella program. And what we looked at people who needed rental assistance. This is not their fault they can't work. You know, this is my neighbor who was just told by the government, you have to stay home and you're not essential. So we helped with some rental assistance in our city. And we're very fortunate. Now I'm going to go back for decades. We've always had a very fiscally conservative council, so they have saved money. And so we had funds from which to draw to help people who needed rental assistance. We had funds for businesses. We made sure that we gave a substantial amount to our food bank here. So we've looked at those things. And one of the things we really do have to sit down and identify is where could we be better? How could we be more support to our community? And I think a task force is a great job. And thank you, Arlette, for that, because I'm going to follow up on that.
Thank you, Arlette. We actually have another question from Jenny.
So my question is, in one of your responses, you mentioned that in the past 10 or 20 years ago, the transition to online education and like work wouldn't have been as seamless. So my question is, where do you see this direction heading in the future?
Well, that's one of those things that, again, we could have a great conversation in a year. We're going to see more and more of it, I believe, because there's ups and downs to, I know if I were in a classroom, I want to be with my peers because I learn so much from the person sitting next to me, as well as from the person teaching the class. And we build on each other's thoughts. So it's always good to be with each other and to have that camaraderie and that stimulation, I think, of thinking. But I can tell you that in our own community, we have a branch of CSUSB, and we call it CSUSB PDC. So it's the Palm Desert campus. And a lot of our students have been studying virtually for years because they didn't have the transportation to get to the other campus, and we didn't have enough teachers over here. And so they've been doing this for a while, and I think we're going to see more and more of that because it is less expensive. And hopefully we'll have the times, though, where we get to come together and really build on each other's ideas, because I think that's where we do our best. Or speaking for myself, I learn from others around me and build on ideas that way. And that's really helpful for me. But I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think we've learned that taking cars off the street is a good thing. But it helps, we have very strong mandates about reduction of greenhouse gases. So this will help us, just that aspect of it. And for the students who can't afford to leave home and maybe don't have the transportation to leave home, or just plain can't leave, or culturally, it is not something that is done. Studying online gives them an opportunity for an education as well. So I think we will see more of it, and we're going to find good and bad in it. And hopefully when we address the good and bad, we're going to be looking through that broad, inclusive lens.
Thank you, Councilmember. Yes, it's given us a different experience, I think, as students attending UCR, being online. I was definitely one of those students that I didn't really imagine myself doing online classes for a full year. It's a little hard for me to focus. And of course, I miss my peers and my classmates, but it's a different experience. I think we've learned a lot of skills, and how to still reach out, right, to our community, to our peers, to our classmates for that help throughout our school. We actually have a next question from Andrea.
So I just have to say, I would love to be quizzing you guys. You have so much information because of your perspective as you go through this. I would love to be asking you questions, but
Yeah, of course.
another time, hopefully we'll get to be together in the same room at some point and have the conversation.
Yes, definitely. We are going to look forward to that. I think there may be some issues with technology right now.
And that's one of the things we're learning to deal with.
Yeah. Oh, I think she can't unmute. It's okay. We're gonna move forward, but Andrea, oh wait, I think she's able to do it now. If not, it's okay. We can move on to a next question. Actually, I have a question for you, Councilmember Harnik. I wanted to ask, and this is a little bit off topic, but I wanted to ask, you also worked as the manager of a professional office building, and small business owners have been vocal about being unable to pay their rent or pay their employees. They worry about surviving the current downturn in the economy. Many may view this issue as a crisis, and I wanted to ask what innovation policies can be implemented to help small business owners keep their doors open right now, especially under COVID?
Well, recognizing that the greatest majority of businesses in the US are small businesses, and so they are critical. That's where we really have to look at how important they are to our economy, to the well-being of the entirety of our nation. So viewing that, and I can tell you in the office building that you referenced, here's the question. Would you rather have somebody in there working who's productive, or would you rather have an empty office? And we are in this together sometimes. So it might be better if somebody can afford it. And this is where it gets tough. It gets dicey, because do you say to somebody who's paying rent, well, you don't have to pay me rent? Well, then what happens to the person who has the mortgage on the building and they have to pay the bank? And again, here we go with that pebble in the pond and all the ripples. But when we can look at it, when we are able to extend a hand, then we need to extend the hand. And is it better to have an empty office or somebody in there who's productive, who will then, again, as time goes on, be able to pay rent? So it's sometimes we have to look at those things and be as compassionate as possible and understand that we can help them. But we've been fortunate that the government has been able to step up with the PPPs and those sorts of things, but we know that can't go on forever. So we are going to have to explore ways to do this. We don't want to lose our small businesses. They're just too important to our economy and to the fabric of our communities, who they are. It's our identity in so many ways.
Yes, definitely lending a hand, even just asking, how are you doing? Or how can I better support you? Are you online? Can I order online? Things like that, to truly lend a hand to our community is very essential.
I love how you're thinking, Daisy, because that's
Thank you.
How do we help others?
Yes. I think Andrea can unmute herself now. Andrea, would you like to ask your questions?
There she is.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. I had a few technical difficulties. But I'm back. Okay. My question to you, you emphasize education a lot, which I appreciate a lot, especially here as students. I think we recognize that a lot. That's the foundation. I truly do believe that. And especially you were touching upon homelessness. I came, how you mentioned, from that mindset of, they use drugs, they don't want to work, that type of mindset. But it was education that made me switch that mindset, and knowing that there's other factors. It's not just drug issues, it's not just jobless, it's a lot of it is, how you mentioned, medical conditions. So how do you think it would be best approach to educate our community upon these factors? Because a lot of homelessness holds that stereotype to it. So how do you think we can educate our community? on that?
It's so tough because you know about it, and I know about it. How do we tell everybody else? And there is such a stigma, and it's unfortunate that we put everybody in one. It's more comfortable, I guess, suppose, in a way, to put it in one tidy little area and say, no, those people are all that, rather than realizing these are individuals. These are human beings, and it's tough to get that information out. We really have to work to get as much of that out as we can to help people understand. And going back to education, I really feel that if we want to solve a problem, we educate. We must make sure that we keep working on creating the highest quality, most relevant and accessible. And that's where we start talking about Wi-Fi and our infrastructure, and recognizing Wi-Fi must be looked at as infrastructure, because it is the information highway. So it is infrastructure, and we have to look at it as another utility because everyone deserves it. But when we look at a lot of the problems that we've seen exacerbated and magnified during COVID, if you look at the ignorance that can create fear and anger and hate, education solves that. If you look at the problem where somebody doesn't have a well-paying job, education can solve that. If you look at somebody with bad health issues and outcomes, education can solve that. So it's so critical that we put a focus on education. And sometimes we kind of take it for granted, I think. And when we talked earlier and you talked about the disparities in education, boy, that's been going on a long time, and we really need to address it. We really have to. Because some of our youth, they don't come from a home where they are going to have that opportunity. So how do we make sure they have it? I mean, I used to look at it and say, school, and I don't know how you're going to like this at this point in your life, but I'd say school should be from 8 to 5. You give people now these young people have a wholesome, academically oriented environment to stay in all day. We know they're safe. We know they're learning. They know they can get the help they need in school. And it's so important that we really take a look. And that may not be the answer, but to me, when I used to work at the volunteer at the high school foundation, I'd say, gosh, they get out at 3, give them 2 more hours where they can work with a tutor or work with somebody else that can help them with their homework or the answers. And there's so many, and I worked with, my husband was very involved with Boys and Girls Club. And one of the times of the day when there were the most problems with youth, from 3 to 5. So, their parents are working and we understand that. So, I think about that. But how do we create that environment where we can have students there and getting all the attention they need and the quality, relevant education?
Thank you, Councilmember. And we can go on about education. As an education major now in public policy, I'm very interested in education policy. So I love the prioritization of education because I agree with you. I think it truly revolves around a lot of things and how we can fix a lot of things. So, I love the prioritization. But I actually have, Jenny wanted to ask another question. Jenny?
Being a leader of the city of Palm Desert, what advice do you have for young leaders hoping to find their own voice?
Well, I'm going to give you the trite, cliched answer, get involved. See if where you live, is there a committee or commission that you can get on that you can learn about? One of our great assets in our community is our youth committee, and they come from our high schools around, and they're wonderful. But find something like that you can, find something that speaks to you. That, I feel very strongly about girlfriend factor. And so I'm immersed in it. It's like, how can I help other women? I was a single mom of 2 at one time. I now take credit for 5 children that I've raised. But At one point, I was a single mom, and I just needed that girlfriend who put her hand out one time and helped me. And I bet all of us on this call can think of that time when a friend reached their hand out and helped us and helped lift us in the moment. But so that's why I'm passionate about it. Find that thing you're passionate about it and speak up and act out and be part of the solution. And most cities have committees and commissions that you can be involved in. And you'll learn an awful lot from them, because there's so much we don't know about how a city runs until we're just immersed in it.
Just to expand off of that a little bit, how important is it for us to get involved in our local government? I think a lot of us, want to do a little bit more higher up, right? But how important is it for our youth right now, and even for, as college students, to get involved in our local government?
And it's so gratifying when you help somebody and you see somebody you helped. Yes, people look higher, but something about being at the city or county level where you're really helping people. You really make a difference in people's day-to-day life. And what a difference, how does that make you feel when you know you've helped someone?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. I know earlier you had mentioned, I don't know if you have them for us, but you had mentioned you wanted to ask us some questions or, get a little bit of our experience. I don't know if you want to take this opportunity to, ask our discussants or even myself.
Well, let's start with you, and thank you for that. And you had talked about how this has impacted the way you're learning. So tell me more about that. I'd love to hear it.
Of course, yeah, I can go first and then I'll pass it on to my fellow ambassadors. But yes, it was definitely a big change for me. I had been living at the university since my first year. And so this transition, going back home and doing everything online, it was heavy a little bit. It was a little bit difficult. I'm not used to being home during, when I'm having classes, and I have two little sisters also that transitioned. So it was just a crazy household. My dad transitioned to working home. So it was a bit of a challenge, but I think that it definitely taught me, how to keep myself accountable, right? Following through with my schedule, setting a routine for myself, because, I could have easily slept in until 12, right? Or 1 p.m. And stayed up super late, but I had to make sure that, my routine was set forth, that I was following it, and reaching out to my professors, reaching out to my TAs, asking them for additional help. So that was sort of my experience. It was a bit of a challenge, but I think there was some good that came out of it and some new skills that I learned, and definitely
like that.
Yeah, and definitely how to keep myself accountable and still follow through with my studies. But that was a little bit of my experience. I don't know if my other fellow peers want to share.
I can share a little bit. I actually had to go home I wanted to go home just because I wanted to be with my family. I think it was very vulnerable time when the pandemic started. And I think it helped me a lot to value home and value our neighbors, like how Councilmember Harnik said earlier, is, being more friendly and being vulnerable and understanding that everyone is going through something. So that's one of the biggest takeaways. And also when it came to learning, unfortunately, not all of our peers have the same privilege as others. So I kind of had to take a step back and say, like, hey, what do I have? And what is my privilege during this pandemic? So that's kind of something that I wanted to bring out. And thank you for the question.
I think we're all gaining in perspective and valuing things maybe we didn't value so much before. I think we're learning a lot.
I don't mind sharing a little bit. I had already been commuting from home to school, so it was kind of a little rough because it was during traffic hours, so I had to make sure that I had enough time to get to class on time. But after transitioning to remote learning, I really appreciated my time on the road because it was like time for myself. And then when I transitioned, it was learning more about myself and what I needed in a routine to succeed, and also finding that balance between personal life and school life, just so I make sure that I'm not pulled in too many directions at once, and I'm also taking care of myself and my mental health.
Wow.
I know Andrea also wanted to share, but she just let me know that unfortunately she can't unmute. So again, one of the downfalls of technology. It's not on our side today, but you know.
Oh, there she is. Here
Oh,
she
there we
is.
This is from my side. This is the biggest challenge I face, the technology, power outages. So I think that
Oh,
was in my biggest, like we had my area, there's a power outage not so long ago. So it was hard to set, like getting access to my classes because I couldn't even turn on my, well, there's no way to get my internet working since it was a whole power outage. And, but something I am grateful for is that during these times, I feel like our professors, well, in my experience, they've been more understanding and more lenient than other times. So I appreciate that because they're being considerate of our circumstances. Like our Arlette had mentioned, not everybody has it the same. So they are being aware of that, thankfully. However, another challenge is distraction. I think that's what Daisy touched upon. I am home, so it is nice to be home with family. However, distraction can get in the way, especially when it comes to college. It's a lot of reading, how you mentioned, a lot of workload. So the distraction is there, but prioritizing our tasks, I think that's what has helped me the most.
you may be developing a skill beyond or a skill beyond what you would have developed had you been going to in front of campus. When you're at home, you really have to check your discipline.
Yeah, at school is so easy. It's like I have the library there. I can sit down, study, no distractions. But here, definitely, it's challenging.
I think it taught us a little bit too, you know, to step back and just kind of pause on. I feel like as students, we're so involved in so many things and we want to do so much here and there. And we, you know, but I think it kind of forced us to sort of step back and, you know, check in with ourselves, see where we are mentally, see where we are emotionally, physically, right? And just sort of take that step back and kind of reflect. So I think it taught us a lot about that as well and how to prioritize ourselves too.
I think we're all learning a lot here. I think the reevaluation is valuable. And I think we'll find more ways that it's valuable as time goes on. This is, you know, every once in a while, and I suppose we all have to check ourselves on this, but I have to remind myself, it's, by the way, everybody's going through this. It's only everybody in the entire world. So it's one of those things where I think we can come out better from this. And again, we all have to identify those opportunities and those things where we've learned and we've grown.
Definitely. And, you know, I wish we could stay longer and have this whole discussion because I know we can go on and on and on and, you know, engage in these wonderful conversations. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have today. I would like to once again thank Councilmember Harnik for generously spending time with us today. And
oh, thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I want to share one thing, a quote that I love, and it's not long, but I want you to, it's something I keep in my packet for council meetings. In this age, and this is so relevant to you too, in this age, in this country, public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. Whoever molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces judicial decisions. And I keep that because I understand how important it is that we have everyone has to work together. We all have to be moving together. And just so you know, that was Abraham Lincoln.
Thank you, Councilmember. We really appreciate that. And again, thank you for spending time with us today to go over such a nuanced and relevant topic for future policy leaders like those in our panel and in the audience. And thank you to all of you who attended today's webinar. Our next online event will be at 4:45 today. When UCR School of Public Policy Dean's Ambassadors will host a presidential debate watch party. So that'll be very exciting. You can learn more about events like this by visiting spp.ucr.edu. See you all at the next event.